are giving Roger Clemens more of an edge to enter the Hall of Fame than Barry Bonds. Now, let me be very, very clear about what I'm about to say. And I thought my man Max Kellerman articulated this point very, very adroitly on First Take this morning. First Take, our television show, 10 a.m. to noon, live every weekday, Eastern Standard Time, 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific, on ESPN. Max's simple position is this. You know what? You can tell literally when they started using PEDs. Whether it was Roger Clemens the year he went from Boston to Toronto and went from a 10-13 record to 21-7, from an ERA near 4 to an ERA of 2. You can look at Barry Bonds when his head started swelling and he started gaining more girth, more mass, and ultimately became a home run hitter as opposed to just an elite gold glove 30-for-30 baseball player. You can tell when that happened. I go a step further than that. Not necessarily deeper, but definitely a step further. I am a person who believes that Barry Bonds was a Hall of Famer before he allegedly, presumably, ostensibly started using performance-enhancing drugs. I know there are Hall of Famers out there who believe anybody who used PEDs don't belong in the Hall with them. I respect that. They're Hall of Famers. If they got there the right way, they have every right to have that position. And I respect that. But I'm just speaking from my vantage point. The way I look at it is, was Sammy Sosa a Hall of Famer before he started hitting home runs? Hell no. Was Mark McGwire a Hall of Famer before he started hitting home runs? No. No, he was not. Not to me. But was Barry Bonds a Hall of Famer before he started hitting home runs? Yes, he was. He was a perennial gold glover. And he was good for 30 home runs and 30 steals a year. Good for it. Roger Clemens. Well, why would I hold something against Roger Clemens? Well, there's a couple of reasons. I know he's a 7-time Cy Young Award winner, most of Major League Baseball history. I know he's an 11-time All-Star. I know he's the league MVP in 1986, American League. I got it. Won the Cy Young Award with 4 different teams: Boston, Toronto, New York, and Houston. No other pitcher has won with more than 2 different teams. I know all of that about Roger Clemens. I got it. One pitching Triple Crown twice, leading in wins, ERA, and strikeouts, 1997, 1998. I got all of this about Roger Clemens. You know what I hold about Roger Clemens? What I hold against him? Some people would sit up there and say, 3rd all-time in strikeouts, career ERA at 3.12. 354 career wins in 24 Major League Baseball seasons. You know what I hold against Roger Clemens? He was an idiot. Now, maybe that's not a reason, Nuno. It's not a reason, John, to omit people from the Hall of Fame, and I get it. But there's something to be said for being stupid. You see, when you make a case about A-Rod, for example, and we've got some sound, Nuno. I hope you can find that sound of A-Rod on First Take this morning. And I'll call on that in a second. But when you make a case for A-Rod, you could make the argument that, you know something? A-Rod had signed for $250 million. He wanted to prove that he could validate those dollars. But he was balling up to that point, which earned him the contract. Then he goes to the New York Yankees. And he signs for $300 million. And then you know what? You can make the case. He was trying to validate numbers he had already accumulated fairly. You look at Barry Bonds. What was he doing before his alleged steroid use? And if the book Game of Shadows, with excerpts that were printed in the Sports Illustrated, where it was highlighting Barry Bonds' purported alleged PED use, it specifically states in there that he was balling and he was doing things the right way. And then what happened is everybody started celebrating Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa in 1998 in their chase for the all-time single-season home run record of Roger Maris. So what happens? Barry Bonds said, oh, that's what we doing now? John, JC, that's what Barry Bonds said. Oh, that's what we doing? So in other words, I'm better than them. Twice as good as them. I'm winning gold gloves. I'm not just smacking home runs. I'm stealing bases. I'm getting base hits. I'm hitting my batting averages up there. All of this. And on top of it all, I'm playing hellified defense. And y'all want to act like these brothers are better than me because they stealing the hearts of America because they're chasing a single season home run title? That's what y'all gonna do to me? Hell with it then. I guess I could do that too. That's according to the excerpts in The Game of Shadows in Sports Illustrated from the book The Game of Shadows. That's according to the excerpts. So my point is that one could legitimately argue, as crazy as this may sound, ladies and gentlemen, one could easily argue it's our fault for provoking Barry Bonds. Now, obviously, I'm engaging in a bit of hyperbole there because ultimately the person that's responsible is him. And I understand that. But in all seriousness, we can't be completely absolved from it. What the hell are we doing celebrating poor folks for and closing our eyes and turning a blind eye and a deaf ear to PED users? I mean, the stuff was so egregious, what Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa was doing, that Mark McGwire showed up to Capitol Hill and forgot how to plead the fifth. Talk about, I'm not here to talk about the past. And Sammy Sosa, who spoke English all the time, talking to numerous people in the baseball community and beyond, suddenly shows up on Capitol Hill with an interpreter. Like he couldn't understand English. Couldn't even sit up there and say, America has been very, very good to me. He struggled to say that much. So you got all of that going on. That's what that's what happened with Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire. And don't get me in the Sammy Sosa bleaching his daggone skin. Don't get me started with what he's turned into. God rest his soul. But I don't think it's beyond the pale, Nuno, John, JC, or anybody else to say that he's putting the late, great Michael Jackson to shame in that category right now. Have you seen Sammy Sosa? They want to attribute it to vitiligo or whatever the hell it is, well, they want to. I ain't buying that. Look at that man. Look at that man. But that's beside the point. I regressed. Let me get back on track. Those guys were cheating. And Barry Bonds said, damn it, look at y'all celebrating them when they ain't even in my class. So let me show you what I could do if I was doing what they're doing. Because everybody in baseball knew who was using PEDs and who wasn't. And now what we do? What we do is we transfer to Roger Clemens. Well, Stephen A., why won't you give him a similar pass? Very, very simple. Roger Clemens left Boston. His last year in Boston, Roger Clemens was 10-13. He wasn't on anybody's radar. He leaves the Boston Red Sox to go to the Toronto Blue Jays. And in 1996 with Boston, he went 10-13 with a 3.63 ERA. Pitched 242 innings. Had 257 strikeouts. The very next year, and he was 33 years old at the time. The very next year, he's 34. He goes 21-7. ERA dips from 3.6 to 2.05. Innings pitched went from 242 to 264. Strikeouts went from 257 to 292. And he won the Cy Young. Come on now. And even then, we still didn't say anything. Because from a numbers perspective, all right, fine. Even though it's relatively suspicious, go on about your business. And what does Roger Clemens do? You know what he did, ladies and gentlemen? He sat up there. He went into retirement. Into retirement. They left him alone. This was 1997. He was in Toronto. He played 10 more years. Highly suspicious with what he was doing. Nobody said a word. And yes, his personal trainer, Brian McNamee, sat up there and volleyed or lobbied allegations in his direction. All of that was true. Nobody bothered, correct me if I'm wrong, Nuno. Correct me if I'm wrong, John. Nobody bothered Roger Clemens until he dared Congress to subpoena him. Dared Congress to invite him up on Capitol Hill. Dared them. All he had to do was shut the hell up and go away. He was retired. And instead, this brother dared Congress to invite him up on Capitol Hill. Now, if you know anything about Congress, if you're a public figure and you're going to open your mouth and dare them to do something like that, first of all, they're going to do it because you dared them. And secondly, they're going to do it because that's more face time for them on television. He showed up on Capitol Hill. You had politicians who were supposedly there to interrogate and put him through an inquisition looking for photo ops, trying to get a picture with him at every turn. What did you think was going to happen? I mean, they just flossed all over him. I mean, it was embarrassing. And somehow, some way, they managed to ask him questions. And do you remember when Roger Clemens said, I misremembered? I didn't even know that was a word until he used it. I misremembered. Got your wife on the cover of Sports Illustrated looking all buffed. Now, for the record, I'm not being disrespectful to Mrs. Roger Clemens. She did absolutely nothing wrong. If that's what she was doing and that's what she wanted to do, training under Brian McNamee herself, that's her business. She wasn't playing Major League Baseball. She wasn't violating any rules. So under no circumstances to Roger Clemens and the Roger Clemens family am I casting any aspersions on the wife or his children, for that matter, who I'm quite sure are wonderful. I'm talking about Roger Clemens. And I'm not even talking about his PED, his alleged PED use, which he has religiously denied. I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about him being stupid enough to open his mouth and dare them to invite him to Capitol Hill. Without that testimony, Nuno, John, without that testimony on Capitol Hill, under oath, is Roger Clemens in the Hall of Fame by now? Yes, he is. Yes, he is. This is the seventh ballot. There is no way on earth that Roger Clemens is left off the ballot for the Hall of Fame this long if he didn't open his big, fat mouth. But because he did, he resembled Rafael Palmeiro more so than anybody else. Remember when Rafael Palmeiro, formerly of the Baltimore Orioles, dared Congress and went up there and pointed his finger in his face? I have never used PEDs. And then suddenly we found out about him and we learned more about B12 vitamins than we ever have in our life. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. They did it to themselves. Barry Bonds didn't invite that scrutiny. He didn't do that. Matter of fact, Barry Bonds was relatively acerbic to the media, from my understanding. He wanted you to watch the show. He wasn't in everybody's face smiling. He felt he was better than Sammy Sosa. He felt he was better than Mark McGwire. We gonna deny that he was? We all know what time it is. And listen, I'm different. I'm not casting any aspersions on people. Like, for example, the Baseball Writers Association of America, those who voted guys in, fine. Those who elected not to and have a certain standard, I get all of that. I understand. They have that right. They cover the sport religiously. I'm not going to sit up here and question great ones like Bill Madden, who I've read since I was a child. He feels the way that he feels he's earned that right. Profound respect for him and his contemporaries who have covered this sport admirably for decades. But I do consider it a distinct difference. Roger Clemens, to me, should be omitted from the Hall of Fame for sheer stupidity, opening his big fat mouth. Shut the hell up. You were retired. Nobody was bothering you. You can go away in the sunset. They didn't give Mark McGwire that option. They didn't give Sammy Sosa that option. They didn't give Barry Barry Bonds, that option. You had it. Nobody was bothering Roger Clemens. And you want to be all sanctimonious and self-righteous and defiant, knowing good and damn well all the evidence was pointing against you. And then Brian McNamee said, well, I trained his wife. And then we see evidence with your wife buffed in a magazine with more muscles than most of us. You don't think that's going to qualify as some shred of evidence against you? You didn't know? Of course he did. But see, when you privileged in our society, you think you could get away with anything. And the smear that has stained Roger Clemens' career, Roger Clemens is the one person we can honestly say brought that on himself. Now, some of you might sit up there, which has absolutely nothing to do with PEDs, and say Pete Rose didn't do that. Pete Rose did exactly the same thing, rather. I tell you no. Pete Rose was irresponsible. Some would argue amoral and indecent. And obviously, the last allegations of his behavior, I'm not going to get into that. I'll stick to the gambling issue and his banishment from the sport of baseball. And here's what I would say to that. Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame too. Unless y'all could tell me that Pete Rose threw games as a baseball player, nothing should take away from what he did on the field. He's all-time hits leader. The greatest nickname in the history of sports, Charlie Hustle. Because you were great, because you outworked and out-hustled everybody. And you produced. There's no excuse for Pete Rose not being in the Hall of Fame. I don't give a damn what anybody says. Roger Clemens, I got no problem with them keeping him out. Zero. Just for sheer stupidity. Pete Rose had issues. He had a problem. Some would say he had a disease. Others who presumably cheated are being punished. Roger Clemens was in the clear. Nobody was bothering him. And he ultimately ended up victimizing himself because he couldn't shut the hell up and just go into the sunset and retire. That's my position. It never has changed.